Welcome to our first episode. This is on Earth Day 2021, April the 22nd. So, what does Earth Day mean? Does it mean something about renewable energy? Does it mean making a lower carbon footprint? Is it all about climate change? Or is it about running out of finite resources? Or is it more about what can you do to try and save the earth from the problems with global warming? I'm Philip Russell, and here's my son Paul, and we're going to go and try and talk about some of the conscious choices we make daily.
Well, on this grand day of Earth Day, it's one of those things where we didn't quite make the decision today. We actually did it yesterday, so we'll count it for it. And setting up a garden, putting some new plants in to make everything look nice. And we decided that perhaps instead of using compost that contains peat, we'll go peat-free, didn't we?
Yeah. We had the choice. It cost exactly the same amount of money, but by not choosing peat but using some other base which is sort of renewable and sustainable, we're not using up the peat bogs, which absorb a lot of carbon.
Yeah, and that's in all the name games of the day, is recording how much CO2 is being is in the atmosphere and how much we are missing. But also it's one of those things where not reducing what we're using, but it's sort of clever ways of putting it, of reusing it, or I wouldn't say recycle because it's a byproduct, but it's sort of, recapturing and storing and making everything better. So, all right then, did you know that over the last approximately 10 years, so this is 2000 from 2020 to 2010, over the decade, given that much, that CO2 concentrations have risen by 0.6%.
It's quite frightening.
It's quite frightening to see how much we've gone up.
I remember when I was at school, which is probably now quite a few hundred years ago, according to most of my students, the amount of carbon in the air wasn't stated at 0.04%, but it was stated as a lower number than that. But now
didn't you say it was like 0.36 or something?
It was something, and
and
I thought, it was my imagination. I'd sort of remembered it wrong.
But we did get your old textbook, and we did find it was the 3.6.
Yeah.
And the newer textbooks, the textbooks nowadays, are stating it at 0.4. So obviously over the thousands of years, the huge amount of CO2 has been increasing, and now we're sort of getting to the point where we've now got to make that decision. We've now got to change the minds, but it's not necessarily changing the minds, but it's getting people to make that simple choice, such as in our case, such as buying that peat-free, choosing to protect the peat bog, rather than just saying, don't really matter, I've always used peat. But one of the major arguments always has been is that the cheap things, the easy things, have always been cheap, and the more good things, the eco-friendly things, they're always seen as expensive, because of course you're paying for the premium of using an eco-friendly alternative. It requires extra processing or manufacturing. But our peat-free compost was exactly the same cost as the normal compost. It was just whether you wanted it with peat or without peat. So the argument that renew or eco-friendliness costs more is it's becoming a load of rubbish, really.
We saw when we were there, we could buy different ones with different amounts of peat in, We could see ones with 50% peat, with 90% peat, and of course the one which is sustainable, one that was also 0% peat. But it's not just the peat, it's making all those conscious decisions where we go thinking that we can make a little bit of difference. I know I talk to a lot of my students and they say, well, if I just do this one thing, it's not really going to make any difference. Why bother? And the answer, I suppose, to this is that if you make a decision to do it and all your friends make a decision to do it, then gradually we start to make some progress. So how about turning off those lights when you leave your room? We've mostly turned to LEDs now anyway, which use an awful lot of
exactly.
energy.
LEDs have been saving the way for ages. You know, what, take a 600-watt bulb and it's now 60 watts? Well, no,
Well,
not quite.
I do it the other way round. A 60 watt is
It's
now
now
a 6 watt.
It makes more sense that way. Yeah.
I went round and calculated all the light bulbs in our house that we've got on.
Which is quite a lot, because someone requires a little bit more light than one other should be noted.
But I'm still using less than 100 watts of light, which is the same as one bulb before.
Yeah, yeah. And that's fantastic for the point of view that you're then not using that electricity, or, you know, which gives us into this lovely thing where, you know, today, beautiful, beautiful blue skies. You know, not a cloud in the sky. Just ignore the one behind us. You know, that's all I can say. But, you know, did you know that last year was the sunniest 22nd of April of all the since records began, which I have to say was the 1960s. So we'll glance over that one. But yeah, last year sunniest, and
this is worldwide.
This is worldwide. This is, you know, not sort of one of the things. So we're hoping today will be the sunniest and beat that record, because of course
it's not a record we want to really beat.
Yeah,
is it? Yeah,
but it's one of those things where, you know, surprisingly enough, it's a sunny day, blue skies, go out there. But that's a conscious decision, right? Okay, I'm going outside instead of using electricity to light up my gloomy house, right? But, you know, things like going on a bicycle. You know, how about this as a decision? Ready? Taking the extra, taking public transport and stopping one stop early. You see, now that is an interesting topic in itself.
Well, that's what your mother does. When she goes into London to work, she's been getting off one stop earlier and then 2 stops earlier and 3 stops earlier and doing some walking, because it's good for her, as well as sort of, it doesn't make any difference really, because the train's still going to run.
Yeah, trains are going to run. It's still going to cost. But by making that small decision, not only does she improve her health, but technically the train isn't working as hard to basically pull an extra person worth of you know, around, you see, because it's all down to that, how much energy things require.
It's choosing to take the train. It's choosing to take the bike or the bus rather than the car. I always hate it when I see kids get into the car in our road and they drive the 200 yards to the school, and there they then sort of drop the kids off and think,
did that really need to spend the petrol to go into the car to be driven? You know, because it's sort of, you know, a petrol car will emit the same amount of petrol, or emit CO2, because cars don't emit petrol, just putting that way. But you know, in neutral than it probably does in accelerating.
But also, if the car is only doing a very short journey, then it hasn't warmed up, the catalytic converter's not working, so basically the car is doing an awful lot more pollution, you know, emitting so much more pollution than it would do if it was warmed up. But then it's healthier. It's a healthier decision to walk. It's lots of things we can do. It's not just walking, which saves petrol, which saves this sort of valuable resource that we're getting through, like there is the phrase no tomorrow. It's thinking about turning off those lights. It's not running the tap while you're cleaning your teeth. Uh, it is about recycling more. How many times do I see students to sort of just throw the can away rather than recycle it? They got better over the years.
Well, I was going to say, over the few years, there was a small statistic reported in the news yesterday that, what was it, 17% of people are more likely to actually not to recycle. That's the wrong way to describe it, but to not be friends with someone who doesn't recycle. If that makes any sense, it's more the sort of, they are choosing. If you don't recycle, you're sort of seen as sort of, you're the enemy, you're evil, and I'm not going to be friends with you. I'm making that choice that I don't want to know you, because I want to only know people who recycle, who are good to the environment, rather than just
Mm.
throwing away.
It's the way things are changing. I think attitudes are slowly changing. We're seeing more in the news. We're seeing programs more on climate. We've got lots of awareness now on plastics and plastic waste. And all of this is Earth Day. It's what we can do to try and keep this world going longer, better, because I'd like to live in a place called Eden. I'd like to live in that perfect sort of place that's wonderful.
I would just prefer just to be able to live. So it's making that lovely decision. It's doing it. We made a lovely decision to start a podcast. Admittedly, we're doing it on Earth Day, but it's we decided to to name this Going Green. So I'm just gonna.
You're gonna look up.
I'm gonna. And what Going Green actually means is to pursue knowledge and practices that can lead to more environmentally friendly and ecologically responsible decisions and lifestyles.
And I think it's the ecologically responsible, being aware of your environment and what you're doing to it. It is thinking about, do I need to have all this electricity on because that's using up more of these fossil fuels? I know, looking at that grid watch, we can see that we are using more and more renewable energy. We've seen over the last few years coal coming right down. We've seen renewables going up. I've got these solar panels on my roof, and at the moment you can see that we're actually got the lights on, the cameras on, but we're actually not using any electricity from the grid.
It's all being generated. Well, that's one of the critical things. How many you see on driving around. How many people are putting solar panels on their houses and things, which is, they're making that step to actually go and show, yes, all right, there's the benefit of sort of like, oh, I'm not spending money on my electricity bill, which is saving money, but directly from that, you see, the grid, the energy grid, isn't having to produce that power. You're self-generating. And I think it's quite a lot of things to say for someone else to tell you, like the council setting up the recycling centres and all sorts of things. But I do think it's a matter of, if you were given a choice, what would you prefer? Or making it easier for you to do the better thing. Such as doing the recycling, having your council, I don't know, perhaps actually recycle not the correct things, but have a better recycling where they recycle more things.
And that you can only do by petitioning your council and talking to them and saying, could they do this, that, and the other? We can do our own local recycling, of course. You can recycle all your food into compost.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think, oh, that's too much effort. Our council are very good. They will actually take all that and they will work on the stuff, and then they'll sell it back to us, of course, as that
Well,
peat-free compost we
peat-free
bought.
compost. Absolutely. Well, yeah, and it is this sort of cycle where you've got to find the reasons behind to do things, but it has to be practical. You know, people don't want to do things not on a whim. That's the wrong way to describe it. But yes, it benefits the planet. But you know, I want to see the benefit myself. You see, so that's where the recycling. It's
Yeah.
a business. They're running a business, but at the same time, although they're not necessarily the cheapest business, this is sort of one of those things where incineration is very much more cheaper. But they're actually saying we're going to pay a better, higher price, and obviously, fortunately, council tax goes up. But instead of sort of paying for someone to incinerate anything, no, we're going to pay someone to recycle it. And so, if you're using your, the pounds where it places, the council's decision is to actually say we're going to put the prices up, unfortunately, but the prices are going to pay for the better service.
And I don't really mind doing that. We've got to think about that every sort of aluminium can you don't throw away that gets recycled, it means that we don't have to go out and dig up more aluminium. And to actually get that aluminium ore and sort of refine it, that costs an awful lot more money than just taking some sort of existing aluminium and recycling that, just putting it back into the system. The same's always gone on with cars. You've had the cars go to the scrapyard and that made into metal, which is put back into more cars.
Yeah, how many old cars are in their new cars? It's one of those interesting things. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and all these materials are it's like your phone. How much precious ore, I say ore, metal and all sorts of is in your phone. Like, all right, do you know how much gold is in your phone?
No, how much?
It's probably something like 3 micrograms. It's something very small because it's on the conductors and on the terminals. And your phone doesn't have that many, but it has a fair few. Fair enough. But you see, instead of digging up new gold, we can just take that and just.
Well, you can start putting. One phone doesn't make a difference, but 1,000 or 10,000, that starts making the difference. We're running out of things like copper. We're running out of lots of those rare metals that are sort of found in phones. I was surprised looking at that periodic table of the proportion of elements used in a mobile phone.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
It's frightening to see that. And once you've got that idea, you can see how much is being used, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to run out. And it's not the fact that I want a mobile phone or I need a mobile phone. It's the fact that I need 2 mobile phones. And, well, I've got that old one. And
no. I've got to have the latest and greatest. That's all I've got to say. I've got to have it. Whether or not I've just bought the last one, but no, I need to have the latest and greatest. But do you need the latest and greatest? Is that last generation phone, the previous years, still working for you?
Well, there are a lot of policies in certain companies that they're not allowed to put the prices up on phones or any goods. And so the only way they can put the prices up is to bring out the next version, the 2021 version, which has got a different colour or a different look, not necessarily different or even better features, sometimes even worse features. I don't like the idea now that phones have got batteries in them that I can't get at. I had an old phone for years and it ran for years. It was on its umpteenth battery.
Exactly, and
it worked.
It works still, absolutely, and it's the conscious. Well, that's the whole other topic. Is this right to repair, right to buy, and sort of all that, but which we won't delve into this today or this episode, which is a
a conversation
it's
for
a
later.
conversation definitely for later. But you know, things are running out. But you know, making things disposable isn't really a good way of where you're going.
There are some things that you think ought to be disposable for health reasons, but dentists don't do that. They don't have a one sort of piece of equipment and they just put it in your mouth, have a look, and then chuck it away. No, what they do is they have a nice stainless steel one, and once they've finished with it, they autoclave it, get rid of all known and unknown pathogens, kill them all off, and they can use that item again and again and again, many years. When I talked to my dentist, and I started with my first dentist when I was a little kid, and he retired several years ago, and he was proud to say that most of the tools he was using were still the ones he had when he looked in my mouth the very first time, because they didn't wear out.
Well, it's one of those things where previously we didn't have the cheaper materials or even the less durable materials, so you had to make those tools out of it. Whereas now, you see, we've got those, you know, the cheap plastics where you can make things. But do you still want to have a disposable, you know, disposable cutlery, for say, when stainless steel cutlery is still around, it's still perfectly fine? You know, and you take the idea if you're any canteen at sort of school or anything, it's sort of like, you know, do they sell the plastic cutlery, in which case you can't use it again, really? Or do they use, but the problem is, but kids, you see, they don't return it. We can't wash it and clean, and we lose it, and we're just forever buying it. But you're forever buying the disposable ones. So you've got to, you know, make the choice and that actually make the decision to get kids to help and return. You know, you've got this thing where you've got I say the lovely buzzword in all the communities is gamification. But, you know, rewarding kids for returning their steel cutlery, or rewarding you for making that decision to be green, you know, should be one thing where half the policy should include, you know, I chose to walk. What is the benefit? Well, you've got not only exercise, but sort of, you know, you've got the apps and games that track your pedometers that give you like gold medals or, you know, silver, depending how far you've not walked.
I think it's down to training. And I think if we actually train small children when they're sort of fairly young, you get them into this, that, and the other, then they keep many of these attitudes for life. And we're seeing this more and more.
It's getting there. It's getting there. It's one of the things where schooling has been and forever will be the best policy in changing all the conversations.
And it's changing the teachers to get them to think about this.
And now we're seeing that the people who originally everything started off, I'm saying early 2000s, you know, even in the 1990s, they're now growing up and being sort of now this, what you call the working generation, maybe work. They're now making the decisions. They're now got the attitude, but they're also going, you know, as you see from, I wouldn't say all the protests, because it's not quite where, but the demonstrations demanding change is more the attitude. But they're seeing is, you know, we're going to live for the next, I don't know, 80 years, right? In those 80 years, I want something to be done. I don't want to sort of have the problem of all these things. I want but the other thing is, we grew up worse, in a worse place. Why do we have to grow up, leave it in a worse place? Surely we can make it better.
I get students say to me, it's my fault and I've got to do something. Yes, it isn't just my generation. It's all generations. And just saying that it's somebody else's fault isn't the way out of this. What we've actually got to do is say, I don't like this. What we're all going to do is we all are going to change. We are all going to try to use more renewable energy. We're all going to try and make and create a lower carbon footprint. We're all going to do our little bit for climate change. And in that way...
Yeah, And if
Gonna
that
get better.
way, we all get better. And it's those, they say those sort of, one small leap wasn't that fantastic, but surely it was a whole large leap for mankind.
Well, perhaps that's another one. So thank you for listening to this podcast. We will be back next week doing this weekly podcast on going green. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.